All right. Welcome, everyone. We've got as our guest speaker tonight, Fr Emmanuel Stamatiou from Perth, who is our guest speaker for tonight. And he'll be talking to us about our church, family life, and our children. And we thank you once again, Fr Emmanuel, for accepting our invitation. And we kindly thank His Grace, Bishop Elpidios, for giving his permission as well to have you as our guest speaker tonight. So welcome, Father. Can we start with prayer first?
Yes, of course. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, O Heavenly King, comfort the Spirit of truth, who is in all places and fills all things, treasury blessings, bountiful giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us of every stain of sin, and of your goodness, O Lord, save our souls. I don't know if I have met you or any of you, but I hope one day that I do. Either you come or we come over, or both. So Father Thanasios invited me some weeks ago, and I actually run a podcast. I speak for an hour to young people every Thursday night. They end up on Spotify, and I did a little trial run of this topic, church, family life, and our children. I took a break last Thursday to be able to present it to them. So that will eventually come up under Spotify from our church website. My normal lesson, I'm working through the homilies of St. Isaac the Syrian, which are very involved. So it was good to have this break. To look at what I'm going to be talking about may not be what you expect, but I'm drawing on some fathers of the church, and I just want to highlight those. And they are Saint Porphyrios, and I use his text, which he has included in a chapter for family and children in the book Wounded by Love. If you have not read that book, I highly recommend it to you, Wounded by Love. The second author I access is Father Thaddeus, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives. Again, if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it to you, and I'll be accessing some of those thoughts that he has. And what you'll notice is that they dovetail quite a lot. The third person I am using is Father Paisios, and I don't think we're going to have enough time, but as again, you'll be able to use the podcast. But St. Paisios, in his book, The Epistles, it's a hardback cover, green hardback cover, and he talks about differences between men and women. And unfortunately, I think this subject is very much misunderstood. And the reason is that what's out there is it's not spiritual in its foundation. And therefore, it goes haywire and it goes wrong. To begin with, I guess if I was going to use one major theme, it would be atmosphere. And atmosphere, meaning the atmosphere that we create when thoughts come to us, and then the atmosphere that we then nurture within ourselves, our spiritual life, the atmosphere in the church, how we bring it into the home, because we have to access the atmosphere from somewhere. It's obviously got to be from God, God's blessings. But then that infuses into our way of life, our inner life. Without the church, people become vacuous. They become very conceptual. Even the idea of God becomes an idea. It becomes conceptual, but we're not into what is a living relationship with God. Therefore, also, everything else then becomes conceptual. This is a disaster. So to start with what is the theme, which is atmosphere, St. Porphyrios says the following. From the time of conception, he says, the fetus hears and senses the environment of the mother's womb. That's profound. And the spiritual state of the mother is interconnected with the spiritual state, obviously, of the father and the atmosphere of the home. Now, you would know that the person who spoke about this is a saint of the church many centuries ago, and that's St. John Chrysostom, where he said that your home should be like a little church. Therefore, the connection between the home and the church, the environment of the church, the environment of the home, and the inner person within us, because we're the temple of God, all has to do with atmosphere. How do we come to terms with this atmosphere, and what do we do about it? Because, I guess, to make the point, when we bumble along in life, thinking that everything is an idea, which is to do with the concept, we live our life in a theoretical manner. But if we want to live our life in wholeness spiritually, as we know with Scripture, it says, shall love the Lord thy God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and with all your strength. That's your whole person. This is what God is appealing to, our whole person. And the world doesn't want to see this whole person, only wants to see it for what it's worth. St. Porphyrios also writes that if the mother does not want the child, then it experiences a form of trauma in its soul. You can see that then atmosphere doesn't rely on intellect, because a fetus doesn't have a developed intellect. However, it has the promise of a life ahead of itself. Life has already commenced. And so St. Porphyrios says that if the mother doesn't really want this child, it forms trauma in the soul of the embryo, which it carries into life. Prayers, therefore, are very important during pregnancy. Now, I don't want, the object here is not to give anyone the guilt, because we always get things wrong. But if we appeal to God, we can do something about it. The only time we can't do anything about something is when we lose our communion with God, when we forget that we need continuously Christ's healing, and that's through the sacraments of the church. We heal our souls, we are reconciled with God. So although these things that I speak about are good advice, it doesn't mean that that's it. It's done for us. It's always possible to recover. And that's where the Sacrament of Confession comes, where things are corrected. We're never in a state of stillness, because that is a state of judgment. God never allows a person to be left in that state. The world does, but not Christ. I have a lot to cover, but one of the things that I've experienced, just to give you an idea of the things that we're talking about from an early age, is, and Father Thanasi would be well experienced with this, when the family comes to give a blessing at 40 days. Obviously, the church does offer the blessing on the day of birth, the 8th day, and then the mother and the father, and it should be both, and the prospective sponsor should all be there for the 40-day blessing. There's a big misconception that these prayers are for the mother, for the child, but they're also for the mother and also for the child and for the sponsor. And at the end of those prayers, which doesn't take long to read, I say to the family, I said, look, this child is a gift to you from God. Your first primary responsibility is to nurture the child and to protect the child in order to raise them for the heavenly kingdom. If that is your number one priority, not where you live, not what car you drive, not what you wear, not what school you're enrolled in, but if this is your number one responsibility because of this gift from God, then you can't achieve this outside of the life of the church. But unfortunately, the life of the church is often seen as something where we come and go rather casually and rather infrequently, which means that we're not actually understanding and perceiving the importance of the role. So with conception, with birth, and then to charge the family with what God has given them the responsibility of. I think I'll skip all of that because I have a lot more to speak about, but there isn't going to be enough time. The atmosphere of the home is established by those who live in the home, by what thoughts occupy them, by what lies in their hearts. If we understand and come to terms with this, then we understand that we have a living relationship with the living God. Unfortunately, what we do is we start to think of spirituality as, I've got to do this, got to do that, got to do this, tick the box. We've almost got this very artificial way of accounting for ourselves. And we lose the power of that relationship with God, which is burning with love. Is there a great deal of frustration or anger, foul language, arguments in the home? That's going to destroy the atmosphere. Now, something that I often also talk about, I just heard something. Are you able to hear me? Yep. Thaddeus talks about this in the book, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives. When we don't have any spiritual orientation, we become very reactive. Something has upset us. And that quickly kicks in frustration, leading to anger, leading to all sorts of other things that we shouldn't have said, we end up saying. That happens to all of us, okay? So again, we're not speaking about these things for judgment. But the spiritual life invites us to be contemplative. It invites us to be meditative, not reactive. The complete opposite. In other words, an introspective atmosphere, meaning inside, where we learn another way of relating to the world outside and to keep our peace. Then we create a very important atmosphere. I think what I would like to do is just talk about the thoughts of Thaddeus. Porphyrios are very important as well, so that you get an understanding of the importance of our very own thoughts and what we do with them. And again, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it to you. I'm going to read page 66 of the book. A man who has within him the kingdom of heaven radiates holy thoughts, divine thoughts. The kingdom of heaven creates within us an atmosphere of heaven. What did our Lord say? The kingdom of heaven is within you, as opposed to the atmosphere of hell that is radiated by a person when Hades abides in his heart. And of course, we can very quickly drift into a very reactive life. The world is very reactive, very judgmental, not contemplative, not meditative. Therefore, the wholeness of the person is exhausted and depleted. It's not that we can't take anymore, but we've put barriers in. The role of Christians in the world, says Saint Thadeos, he's a saint of recent saint of the Serbian Orthodox Church, just like Paisios and Porphyrios. He says the role of Christians in the world is to filter the atmosphere on earth and expand the atmosphere of the kingdom of God. We're coming to a very important point, and that one of the very important points is that this, which is spiritual progress, and we don't sit there and say, I'm getting somewhere spiritually, because by the grace of God, that can never be spoken about. It's a silent thing. When we keep guard over our whole world, by keeping guard over the atmosphere of heaven within us, for if we lose the kingdom of heaven, we will neither save ourselves or anybody else. He's saying also, and what's very important, that when we are able to keep our peace, other people will be attracted to the peace and warmth within us, and they will want to be near us, and the atmosphere of heaven will gradually pass on to them. It is not even necessary, he says, and this is what I particularly like, it's not necessary to speak about this at all. We can do this in silence. There is communication in silence. People feel uncomfortable about silence, but the atmosphere of heaven is something that we nurture within us. I'll go on to some of the things that Saint Porphyrios talks about. He's saying that when we, in our own family home, when we're disciplining children, we should be very careful not to be very harsh and insistent. And he gives an example of a young teenager, a boy, who would come home and his mother would always say, "Where were you? Who were you with? Or why are you late?" Now, these are all the things that, understandably, a parent who cares about their child would ask. But what is St. Porphyrios' advice on this? Because you know what's happened? As the mother has continuously hammered this point at every point, the child has withdrawn from the mother. So as the mother's taken the offensive, the child has taken the defensive. Therefore, there's no communication. This mother came to see St. Porphyrios, opened up in confession to her or to him, and he says, what you should do is keep silence and say what you need to say in prayer to God. What is prayer? Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of confusion about this very important central subject. You know what he advised her? He said just 15 minutes, no more. Not 2 hours of prayers, not 3 hours, just 1/4 of an hour. And to ask God, speak to God, and then keep silence. Don't say anything to your son. Now, when you remove the offensive, then you also disengage the defensive. We know that in sport. Basketball is the clear one on this. And so she stopped. She spent 1/4 of an hour every night just praying and asking God to help her, and using the Jesus prayer as well. And suddenly, the young man was disengaged with what was the game. He didn't know what to do. He started to feel uncomfortable, and he put to his mother, he says, "What is wrong? Is there something wrong with you, Mum?" And she said, no, I'm very well. And then he started to inquire about her, you see? So he's opening up to her. Obviously, these things aren't just recipes. Every family is different. But, you know, the atmosphere that we create firstly within ourselves, whether we're the mother or the father, if we're able to also reflect and understand the enormous value of the church and spiritual life as it enters into us, like Thaddeo says, to create this heavenly atmosphere within us. Because we don't have a lot of time, I want to go to another author. I don't think I mentioned him at the beginning of the lesson, but he is Father Michael. And Father Michael doesn't have a surname because he wanted to remain anonymous. And he wrote down in his book the 10 commandments for Orthodox spouses. I can see a few of you. Are you aware of this? Have you any knowledge of these 10 commandments? No? Okay, listen to them. Because they highlight differences between men and women. And these are spiritual issues. And if we have time, we'll talk also about what Paisios says about the gender differences. You know what St. Paisios does? He elevates the woman and says what the strength is of the woman, and then he knocks her down. Sorry, that may not be the appropriate language. And then he raises the male, and then he knocks him down. And then so it's a level playing field. But you'll be amazed at the perception spiritually. You know, a lot of people pursue knowledge because they want to know about facts. In the end, facts are confusing. They're contradictory. You all know that about COVID. I mean, there's 100 different million stories about what COVID is, where it's come from, how to treat it. I mean, there's no end to that. And I want to draw away from that. That's not spiritual life. Let me read to you the 10 commandments for Orthodox spouses. I use this a lot. Don't pretend, number one, don't pretend to be a teacher to your spouse. The best way to change him or her is to love him and her as your own self. 2, marriage is a constant but beautiful adventure. I don't know how many people would agree with this. A beautiful adventure, which helps us discover our true self, the world of the soul and of our spouse, and to know God in our house, the church, which is the little church, St. Chrysostomos. We draw the atmosphere from the main church and we bring it into our home, the ikonas, the place of prayer, the candili, the incense. 3, we accept our spouse as he or she is, with his and her weaknesses and idiosyncrasies. You know what people do these days? You know, this is not working for me anymore. You know, it's just not working. Where's the patience in this? Where's the endurance? Where's the trial to shape my person in order to prepare me to face God? Rather than, no, this is not for me, this is not working for me. And this is where we are now with a lot of people. There's no patience in anything, no peace in anything. We accept our spouse as they are, with their idiosyncrasies, not as we would like them to be. The family is a palestra, which is like a courtyard, an open space, where the souls exercise in the courtyard of paradise, meaning that what we carry is a preparation for our spiritual life while we're creating the atmosphere in our home, for the children, for each other. It's a blessed place. It's a beautiful place. 4thly, try to understand your spouse. Don't forget that the husband thinks with dry logic. This is critical. The husband, I know these are generalizations. They're generalizations, but wait until you hear what St. Basil says about this. Don't forget that the husband thinks with dry logic, whereas the wife with emotion and the heart. Very important differences. So what you end up is the husband doesn't understand the wife because the wife is incorporating many things in how she feels, but the husband can't sort of decipher this, which is coming from too many directions. Whereas the husband, because he's rationally orientated, likes to compartmentalize everything. So everything remains the same while he focuses on the problem, which then makes the woman feel as if he's not listening to her. And off we go. So it goes like this. Fifthly, don't try to impose your opinion and to correct your spouse. Strive rather to correct your own self. You know, that's from scripture. That we can't judge anybody, that we have to first fix ourselves. St. Isaac the Syrian, in the homilies that I've been explaining, talks exactly about that. We have to fix ourselves. If I was going to say, if I fix myself and create a positive atmosphere within myself, what thoughts I entertain, how I manage them, then I create a positive atmosphere, which is not restricted to the boundaries of my own being, but radiates that heavenly goodness to everybody around me in the environment of the home. We can make the difference. It's not a problem-solving solution as everybody wants to talk about out there. Everyone wants to problem solve, but we don't have the correct orientation and we don't understand the atmosphere within us. So don't try and impose your opinion and to correct your spouse, but strive to correct yourself. Love lives with the harmony of oppositions and with forgiveness. Don't get angry. So another one is when parents get angry with their children because they're not listening, you know that the child is only looking at the anger, is not listening to the words, and therefore is learning anger, but not what words are being conveyed. Therefore, the child will replay the passion of anger. And then the parent sees the anger in the children and they gets unsettled. But it's actually been learnt from them. You see, we have to be very careful. Sixth point, with faith, patience, and love, all the difficulties of life are faced victoriously. People have forgotten that. 7, the greatest enemy of married life is egotism, self. Attacking our spouse does not save us, but rather attacking our own egotism will save us. 8th, the best example for our children is for the father to love the mother and the mother to love the father, and for the children to see them praying and attending church. Beautiful union of the family before God. There's nothing more beautiful than that. 8thly, and you have to, Father Thanasi, you're going to have to tell me when we're nearly time, because I lose track of time. The best example for our children is for the father, as I said, to love the mother and the mother the father. 9th, the secret of family peace is for one to be able to forgive and to love and respect. And the last one is, marriage is a great mystery. You know, we use the word mysteria in the church to mean sacraments. But mysteria doesn't mean, because I can't explain it, because I can't explain the transformation that occurs because I receive God's blessing, and because I can't explain it, I put it in the hard basket, which is called mysteria. It's a mysteria. I don't understand it, therefore I put it in that hard basket. But a mysterio is the incomprehensible love of God that infuses you and me in order to orientate ourselves to what is good and what is beautiful. Marriage is a mystery which begins in the church and is renewed with confession, with the divine liturgy, and the remaining mysteries of the Orthodox Church and our living faith. Now, because time is rather tight, I thought it would be good to look at what Saint Basilius refers in his book, The Epistles. Are we going okay, Father Athanasius?
No. Yes, Father. Yes.
Okay. I've actually titled this Gender Challenges, but that's not what Saint Basilius writes. But it is a challenge because as I read this, the women will be challenged until they hear the end of what he says, and then the men will be challenged until they hear how he concludes, because you're initially not going to feel happy about it, but you're hearing a saint and he's opening your mind to open your heart to God. He says, women, like men, can enjoy and find rest in reading and are able to be benefited more than men, since they are lacking in much logic and have more faith. So he says they lack logic, but they have more faith. Unfortunately, he says, however, few are those who are benefited and make progress. He's talking about women. Most, when they lay hold of themselves, are in turn seized by the funeral dirge, which means lament, grief, meaning they're overwhelmed, and continually wail and complain, conducting microscopic spiritual tests on themselves, so they become very obsessional with what's happening, without cutting off their weighty passions and later the minor ones, which by the grace of God, gradually they vanish by themselves, the little ones. So we get caught up in the detail, in other words. Although most women, he says, have great presuppositions for the spiritual life, they make little progress. They have less logic. You know, in these days, this kind of gender, explanation, the world doesn't want to know anything about it. I mean, it's almost unacceptable. You'd have to then, cross out a few lines here and there. Although most women have great presuppositions for the spiritual life, they make little progress. They have less logic, he says again, a trait that is not harmful, but rather beneficial in regards to faith. Whereas men undermine their faith with their logic. This is the one for the women to hear now about the men. While women possess love in their nature and can dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to God, men need work in order to make their heart beat for God, meaning they're like stones because they're so logical. When man's heart does not work for God, he is in no way different from a stone statue. Unresponsive, because you can see that if I have any understanding of something, what I was saying earlier, a conceptual idea, then I establish my self-importance in understanding. Whereas a woman's heart is open to God and therefore can progress with faith. I think Saint Basil says it. It matches perfectly with what Saint Michael said about men tend to think with logic, whereas women tend to think with their heart. It says a lot, and it explains a lot. Hence, we all have presuppositions for the spiritual life, St. Basil says, both men and women. We have no excuse, for it is sufficient for us to want to utilize abilities God has given us accordingly, that we might attain paradise near him, so that he may rejoice, and we, his children, with him. This all means what we were saying, the courtyard of paradise, that man and woman meet, we complement each other. We need each other. And if we are able to be patient and understand what might seem to be like resistance or potential conflict, if we come to terms with it spiritually, it actually helps us to progress spiritually. It softens the man, and it also enables the woman. We need each other, and children need both in order to keep that in balance and to create that spirit of understanding and of love in the home. Rather than the ugly messages that people are sort of deep sea trawling on the internet to gather every piece of rubbish, I mean, because that's what people are doing these days, and then end up confused. The simplicity of the gospel for your well-being is like nothing else. I don't know how long I've been speaking for, Father, but maybe there's time for questions.
Yes, of course. Should we? Okay, thank you very much, Father. If anyone has a question, maybe we can allow them to say the question to you, Father. If anyone has a question, maybe there's a reaction at the bottom that shows a, maybe if you can just put the hand up like that if you want to ask a question, or if you want to write your question in the chat thing here at the bottom. Okay. Father, I wanted to ask, okay, there's one from Mario. Mario?
Hey, Mario.
Your blessing, Father.
Are you over your mouth burns?
Yeah, that's why I took the screen off, so that people wouldn't see me struggling to eat pork dumplings. Father, thank you for pointing out these very salient points about the God-ordained gender distinction, which is under such, I would say, terrible attack today. Yeah. And the complementary, let's say, makeup of our respective natures, which are meant to be for mutual spiritual upbuilding, is a point that needs to be reiterated, I think, again and again, that men and women have their respective charisms, and in their utilization, we are one in Christ. With God's help when we utilize them. That's more of a comment. My question was in relation to generating that atmosphere you were speaking about at the beginning of your presentation, which is just so absolutely important. Some concrete methods that you already mentioned. I'd like you to elaborate a little bit about children imitating parents. So I don't want to talk about what Vika and I do, my wife and I, but our daughter, she'll put her hand up, and she's 18 months. She'll put her hand up and try to do the cross, or she'll lift up her hands, or she'll do something that looks like a medallion and almost fall over. Yeah, irrespective, we're sinners and all that. So that's not. But how important is that? What else can we do to show by example to our kids within the home why it's important to take up the Christian life, so that we're not talking down at them later on and we don't lose them later on?
Okay, so let me firstly say I am a grandfather of 6 grandchildren and of 3 children, and thankfully my wife, Presbytera Maria, and myself still live in our family home. They all are now married and live in their own homes. I hesitate because every couple is different, every home is different, every individual is different, every child is different, and that's the beauty of God's creation. But I think when I reflect back, and even with the many confessions that I receive, often we have choices and it starts to go pear-shaped when we lose the idea that we really do have many choices when we make decisions. The narrowing of choices, meaning the idea that there's no way forward, is also a question of faith. What you do practically in the home is a reflection of what is in your hearts. So if you're lifting your hand to do the sign of the cross, you can, it conveys something deeper than the action because you're doing it with all your heart. You're opening your heart to God. The child's then spiritual space, the soul, is expanded. When a child doesn't have an understanding, a presence, an exposure to this atmosphere, it's then restricted and confined to what it understands with its intellect, not its greater space of the inner heart. When that happens, as the child grows up, their choices become very restricted. Risks become greater than opportunities, and the child is disengaged. And that's where a lot of, and I know it's very simplistic, but a very negative view starts to creep in about who I am, what I need to do, that I'm successful. There was another example of Saint Porphyrios, where the mother was pressing and pressing, harassing, hammering. He used the words of hammering the ears of the child to do better and better and better. The child didn't want to do didn't want to respond at all. It was just a shut case, because all it was this cruel introduction to a competitive, indifferent world, and to succeed in it, the rat race, not to find a place within which was happy, peaceful, that could fill. We started with a prayer, with fill all places and in all things. That's the Spirit of God. Now, it's not just, the spaces out there, it's in here. And if we do that, we're preparing the child to become resilient, to be able to have choices, perspectives, but which are spiritual, to be able to have, this is another one that St. Isaac the Syrian refers to, is ascetic discernment. Now, ascetic discernment, not nice big words, sound, I don't know anything about this, and I'm not an ascetic, but if you exercise anything, if you have an interest in God and you are drawn by the love of God, that causes an ascetic response within you, and therefore to be able to understand what is potentially harmful and what is beneficial. But spiritually speaking, that's the fullness of the human person, which allows this resilience to know that God is there. We can speak to him. We can open our heart to him, that things will be okay. Often people, I'm sort of going on a bit, but I'll just finish one last point. A lot of people in confession say that I'm tormented by invasive thoughts. I highly recommend, again, this book, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives, by Father Thaddeus, because he goes into all these areas and he tells you how to avoid attending to negative thoughts. We have choices again, but because we're not aware of them, we think that simply having intrusive thoughts is a bad thing. Well, we're all going to have thoughts, but the issue is, what do we do with them? Do we ignore them? On the other hand, if we fight them, we're giving them power. But we all have thoughts. And if we give traction to thoughts, they then lead into actions in life. And these are from the early fathers of the church, but they have very practical application in everyday life.
Father, permit me to say something else, please, Father Nasi. I just want to respond briefly to that latter part, Father. Yes, I love the analogy that you make about the child being restricted in terms of their inner life if they're not given that kind of spiritual cultivation and freedom and space. And that's all very, very well put. I'm just thinking about this issue in relation to thoughts, which is something that we don't talk about much at all, actually. And I mean, you obviously do within the framework of confession, that the intrusive thoughts that are persistent can be a sign of many things, but they're certainly not ours unless we engage with them. Unless we engage with them. So there is that reality of the demonic, which we kind of want to avoid, and we shouldn't talk about it too much, I guess, because it calls these forces into our space. But definitely, when we have these sorts of thoughts, we need to do something about it.
Yes,
and there's a lot of practical advice in relation to how to avoid them in the literature that you speak about: turning to Christ immediately, preoccupying yourself with something else.
I also say, I also say to people, leave it here in confession. You've confessed it. Now you need to say, if it comes again, this is not from me, this is from you. You understand what I'm saying? Which is from the dark force. This is not from me, this is from you. And to say to yourself, I've confessed, this is finished. Sorry, I've cut you off.
Oh, no, not at all. That's right. And those thoughts, if we accept them and embrace them, they translate into action. And those actions, if they're sinful, they affect the family home, they affect your kids, your wife, and everything else.
They do. They do. Everything that we think about and everything we do and the way in which we do it. If we become very impulsive and very reactive, quick in our actions, that shows something else. And then somebody points out, you have anger. So not, I don't have anger. Who told you that I've got anger? But it shows because we're agitated. And therefore we have to address that. And we have to become much more sensitive about how we are responding to those thoughts and or what we have to carry in our day, from work to home, from home to work, or wherever, or whatever we do. We have to keep our peace, that we have choices. Sometimes when something happens in front of us, even with young children, and there's some argument going on, we also have a choice not to do anything at that point in time when everything is sort of in an upheaval. We'll lay everything to rest, and then we sit down quietly and we say, you know, what happened there? So there's time to peacefully look at that and to look at it differently. We always have choices.
Dimitri or Penny?
Hi, Father.
How are you? Dimitri.
Thank you, Dimitri and Panayota.
How are you, Panayota?
Thank you.
Love your work, man. I don't know how to say it any clearer, but everything you were saying was just really resonating. And
you know why, don't you? You know why?
Why?
Because we're all human. We all have the same experience. We have different personalities, but even that and the resistance that we spoke about between men and women, but even in our own personalities, even between men or between women, or all of that resistance is actually not incidental, not random. You know, a lot of people go about their lives these days, and you hear them and they say, I feel really good today. And you hear them say, I feel really lucky and I've had a lot of good luck today. Or on the other hand, they say, you know, things haven't worked out for me today. I've had a really bad day. But as Orthodox Christians, everything that we experience is actually God talking to us. And when there's a resistance and a frustration, that means we need to pick up the spiritual signal. Because if we don't, we're going to relate again back to what I said earlier, respond and react impulsively to what's happening. And then we don't thank God, because then we think that God somehow has left us at random to experience life as it comes. That's nonsense. He's always there protecting us. But we have to open up ourselves to him. He's always embracing us. The love of God is beyond any understanding.
You just said what I wanted to say. Because in our experience, I was going to say that in hindsight, the thing that's most obvious to me is that any outcomes that have been positive in terms of our raising of children have not been
Instructive.
Through our efforts or through my logic or Penny's heart.
Yep.
It's been because God has been carrying us along in his hand, and you can see it in retrospect.
That's
what
the
you
truth.
just said.
That's
right?
the truth. That's the truth.
And
is
so
the
we don't need to
absolute
worry about this.
That's
and
right.
It brings to mind the parable of the mustard seed. I was thinking of that, saying, look at the mustard seed, small as the seeds. It grows without anybody knowing how it does, but eventually ends up in this beautiful big tree.
Now, Dimitri, if you think about it and you make a comparison between people who are of the faith and those who are not, they'll go to tricks and hints and handy ways of going about problem solving.
Yeah, hacks.
Which basically is compressing this to a superficial level. So you've got a human situation and you make it into nothing but a bunch
of theories,
bunch of theories, and then we trash the human person. The two words that are very important are integrity, which is wholeness before God, integrity, and dignity, and the depth of the dignity of another person. That's why people trash each other, because they can't see the dignity that is sown in there, which is of God in another person. All the things that we hear about what's going on in the world, it's just horrific.
Look, I look back on my life, and all I see my sins, like my failings all the way through. But despite them, things have gone well.
Yes.
Right. This is what I see, and that then proves to me that, like, what we did, which I thank God for, was that from when our kids were little, we've got 5 now. Thank God. When they were little, we had 3 nappies at one stage, and all on one pram, and we're at the back of St. Catherine's in the whatever that entrance area is called, where all the candles are, because we couldn't take them into the church because they make too much noise, and we were hanging out there with our kids.
Dimitri, I've said to people that a person who comes to know God, as they get older, they should soften. They should have less to say, knowing that God cares for them. Whereas a person who doesn't know God, generally speaking, generalization, goes the opposite way, gets more frustrated, gets more angry, gets more upset, gets more impatient. And the reasons are obvious. And that's why so much time is wasted on programs and solutions in all sorts of fields, health and welfare and mental health and all the rest of it. They're all in our faith. They're all in our faith. Don't
you think it's also in the grace that comes from our sacraments, from having the kids in church from a young age? They just absorb it like a...
And that's the atmosphere that you draw from there, where the priest at the end of the service says, love the beauty of your house, directly to the icon of Christ. All of this is gathered by you, and without you knowing, this grace after the service is taken home.
It is. I really believe that. I don't think that it's all psychological theories.
No, it's not psychological.
We raise our kids, or
it's reality.
The kids just are different.
St. John Chrysostom speaks about.
Yeah, right.
It's reality. We know that's reality.
Yeah, it's true. It's all real. It's not a fairy. It's like a true fairy tale. I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost too good to be true.
Very Tolkien of you.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Like you go, wow. It's actually all real. All this stuff.
And
And
I love it. There's a lovely saying which I used at the sermon today in the church. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, nor has it pierced the heart of anyone what God has prepared for those who love him. You know, all of this and all the difficulties, all the resistance, the struggle, we keep our faith, knowing these things which Christ has told us, even though we fail, but we learn through the failures. God does not judge us. He's delivering us all the time.
that's it.
Any other questions? Anyone? Don't feel shy. We've got Father here who is an expert.
No, I'm not an expert. No, I'm not.
I think we should get you to lead our parents group, Father, every time.
Yeah.
I also have, as I said, Father Thanasio, I have every week, I have a podcast I run for an hour, and I've covered a lot of subjects. I've got probably about 2 or 3 years, because I meet every Thursday night, and then they're put on Spotify. So if anybody wants to access those, you're welcome.
Father, there was a question, the Spotify, what is the podcast name?
Oh, you'll have to go into evangelismos.com.au and then follow the prompts. That sounds, just like a computer guy, but
I've seen it. It's very impressive. Father, I've got a question. So obviously, my daughter is ready to become a teenager, and sometimes it's obviously you need to trust your kids. But
yes,
you can see that slowly they're at that age where they're starting to keep things from you.
yeah,
And, like I remember at my age, like I come from a family of 5 children. And obviously at that age, I remember we started playing up. So we would hide things from our parents. And so my question is, what do we need to do as parents to obviously be vigilant, but to keep that trust with our kids? Because I don't want to be someone who obviously, hides behind the tree or something to, my dad used to do that with us, but anyway.
yeah.
So, yes. So,
Well, it's very difficult to answer that question. My immediate response where a parent has concerns like that is I want to talk to them. So I understand them and I understand the child down to that level. What I do, even before we get to that point, because my experience in the church is that when the circumstances gather to the point where things have become difficult and way forward is difficult, the circumstances are difficult to change given what's led us to that point. So all the things I spoke about are preparational in the atmosphere of the home, one of trust, one of love, one of understanding, one of openness, not one of, as Saint Porphyrios said, of hammering. Because then you end up with a one-way conversation. The other thing that I recommend to parents is that around 8 or 9 years of age, and you'll be surprised at 8 and 9 how the conscience of a little one kicks in. So what I suggest, not for you now, but for parents generally, is to bring their young one into confession from around 5, 6, 7. The child by then has already accustomed themselves to the idea. So it's like we go down to the ocean and I say, Father Thanasi, we're going to just rush into the ocean and just crash into the waves. And then you're going to take a deep breath because it's so cold. You got to do it gradually and slowly. And as they see the parent confessing, they have no problem confessing. Therefore, what you've got then is not this tight situation between the mother and the father and the concerns and the worry, but you've also got the outlet, if it's done properly, not moralistically, meaning that kind of thing, but that the child already sees the familiar face of the priest, who is also a friend of the parents, and therefore it just seamlessly allows the child to open up with trust. And trust is a big thing. I mean, it is with adults as well, that you're in safe hands. And we've heard so much horrible things out there, in the world, horrible things that children have to endure. And they don't know who to trust, and they don't know where to go, and then end up with, a tide of group thinking where they're persuaded and swayed towards what is, out there. It's a real worry what is out there. So again, the most important protection for a child, and it sounds very broad and general, Father, but it's that loving environment creating in the home, and without actually raising now we're going to talk about this, but that it's just seamlessly leading into all sorts of just general conversation. It is a difficult time because you can't be over-directive, again, with the offensive, which then leads to a learned defense and then a shutting out of the parent. But often, and it wouldn't be in your case, Father, but I have a certain family where the mother has come to see me, and the child is a late teenager. There's no background in church life. And already what's happening is that the 18-year-old is mimicking behavior of her peer group, which has nothing to do with the church. Then you're really up against it. That shows you how important it is to create that safe sanctuary, which is the home, which is drawn from the church. I don't know, it's a difficult one, but the other thing to look at is your daughter and anybody's daughter or anybody's son, whether they can confide in things, whether they're able to open up and talk about things which concern them. I'll be honest with you, I had a very peaceful family life. Nothing was asked of me. There was no argument in the home, and that's a huge blessing for me. But I got no instruction about anything, We have to find our way. And, another way of answering your question is this, that we raise our children. And as you said, Dimitri, I've made all these mistakes in life, but I know that God still loves me. We all do. But you have learnt that. You have established this relationship with God. The child also has to, and I liken it to, I don't know that people drive manual cars anymore. Most people drive automatics, but it's like going on the freeway and leaving your car in first gear. You're going to burn the engine. The child has to move to second and third gear and has to learn to maneuver that. So your role as parents is to maneuver that transition from childhood into adulthood, held up by the foundation of a positive atmosphere of love and trust in the home, and all the other things I spoke about. So that there's an opportunity for the child to hear, absorb, reflect, but not be compressed and hammered with something, but is able to interpret what is being said, value it in their own little space, which might be in a little bedroom, or when we're saying a little prayer, or whatever it is, but in their own space, so that they can start to own what it is that must be for all of us. We must have a primary relationship with God. It can't be secondary. It can't be through my father. It's because of my mother, or my father's a priest. Therefore, that's my spirituality. We park it because other people come and go. No, I have to face God. And this is what we're developing in the child, to be able to understand the beauty of that relationship with God, which is primary. Can't be, it's like saying going on a holiday, which we can't go anymore, and you end up with a vicarious holiday, which means looking at brochures, looking at, I don't know, viewing images or moving recordings of Paris, but I'm not in Paris. The relationship with God must be alive and relevant. Otherwise, we're back to what it is. We learn God as something that's, somewhere else.
Thank you, Father. Any other questions? Anyone? Any concluding remarks? Anyone?
Even objections.
Ella, Dimitri. Ella.
What you just said reminded me of something I heard, that Saint Joseph the
Hesychist.
not the Hesychist, the Joseph Katunakiotis,
Okay.
of Katunakia, used to say that any child that's been under a Petrachili
Yes.
will always return to the church eventually, because obviously they, as monks at Mount Athos, a lot of people go there saying to get help for their children who have erred, and he would reassure everyone. Yeah,
that's very true, Dimitri, but it depends on the spirit that we do this. Because another point which I didn't actually, and I thank you for the opportunity, because, and it's not because of your what you've highlighted here, but the other point that is said here is that we should not be overprotective of our children, because to be overprotective means that we stunt the child. It's not able to express itself and find itself, so that the relationship with God becomes real. So we might come and go from church, and I've seen many young people do that and then completely abandon it. And they've been under the Petrachili. I'll give you an example of that. And I want to be very careful here, but a family used to come every Sunday to church. One of the children showed a lot of promise in sport, a lot of promise. They approached me and said, Father, there's a lot of promise for I'll just call him little Johnny. So they take little Johnny to soccer, and church is completely abandoned, not just for him, but for the whole family. And what happened after that is the child grew up. The child then married outside of the church, not to an Orthodox person, but that's not the issue in itself, but not even in the sacrament of marriage. I'll give you another example. I mean, when I first started where I am now, Perth is a small city, I would do an average of about 30 marriages a year, okay? Now, all our churches, of which there are 3 in Perth, at this point, we're nearly to the end of the year, it's just 15, right? That's where we've gone with many, many things. That's why I also raised this issue of this gift of God, which is the child, and to fulfill the charge that comes with this gift is to raise this child for the heavenly kingdom. We're off with the fairies. Now, what happened was that this child did not succeed in soccer. But what the family succeeded was to remove the child and themselves from the life of the church. Well, you know what the church is. As Noah built the ark and everyone was laughing at him, everyone's laughing at the church out there, scoffing at it, as they did to Jesus. But it's the ark of salvation. So I could say more. Yes, the petrachili, but also the commitment to endure and to follow through, because something you love, you cannot turn your back to, because it's so important what this is, which is the word of God, the presence of God, the receiving of him, and then to make light of it. Well, what are we talking about here? I honestly, as a priest, when I see these things, I actually grieve. I have a deep sorrow.
We can see God working though and bringing kids back though through these youth groups that we're doing.
Yes.
He's greater than we are, and we should grieve and pray, I think,
Yes.
but not lose hope. And in the end, look, think about Mount Athos in the mid-60s or mid-50s, just before they had their 1,000 years, and everyone thought that Mount Athos was about to disappear and be no more.
That's right. Yeah. And then the rejuvenation. Yeah.
It's not up to us. We can't lose, you know. One last thing I wanted to say, because I think it's really, it really struck me as a role model. It's a role model for me to try and emulate, which is in the life of Saint Silouan.
Yes.
It's written by then Metropolitan Sophrony of Essex. And
yes, I've read that. Not to despair.
So he talks about how when Saint Silouan was growing up, I forget what his name was as a layperson, but anyway, how his dad one day, he was in charge of making the meal on a Friday, and he he boiled up pork or something as a soup on a Friday. And his father and all the rest of the people there, you know, they all ate it. And it was 6 months later that his father took him aside and said to him, you know, son, when you made that pork soup on a Friday, it made me feel sick on the inside. It took him that long to react. And that's what you were saying at the beginning, how you need to become a meditative sort of person as a father, not a reactive person, and wait for the right moment to correct your child.
Well, when you look at reactive, I draw that word from what the passions do.
Yeah.
So passions are reactive. So anger, lust, money, gluttony, it's all reactive. Whereas spiritual life is contemplative. It's to say, okay, this is what I feel, but I now need to apply what it is in my response, so that I become a different person. That's where I draw from. This is to do with, again, from St. Isaac the Syrian on passions.
Anyone else? Anything before we finish for tonight?
Hi again, Father.
Yeah. Okay, Mario, last question.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. I've been thinking about it in relation to the devices, iPads and phones and all of that, Father, that have proliferated now, and which, without judging anybody, become a sort of go-to in terms of parenting when things become difficult. I mean, I can speak for ourselves. We don't use devices, but you know, in the evening when we conk out, we'll let our little one watch a nice cartoon or something like that. I mean, that's just as much to give us a break as it is to. But my wife is pretty diligent with not letting her watch TV during the day. I'm not saying it's a bad thing if you do, whatever. We've all got our struggles and our approaches and everything else. But the thing about images in particular, YouTube and all of these kind of different sites that kids can look up, is that images import passions almost, because it's a kind of conditioning that can take place, and it's taking place unbeknownst to us, because we think it's going to be a distraction or the child is watching a narrative, but it's a whole conditioning that's taking place.
it's also unbeknown to the child because the child, we don't fully realize this, it becomes somewhat hypnotic. And I mean, I've definitely walked into the room where my grandchildren are watching a cartoon or something. They don't actually hear me. I have to repeat 3-4 times that I'm there because they're completely absorbed by this, cartoon. So
my question is, in terms of I agree. I mean, it's a similar thing. I mean, our logic has been, at least if when we put on a movie for her, let's say at night, there's a whole narrative there, and it's a good narrative, like good triumphing over evil or something like that, then her attention span is not constantly moving from one thing to another, which is also bad, because then you don't have any defenses, actually. So if we're conditioned by the constant movement of images, and I mean, I am as well to a degree with Facebook and social media. I check, it's when I shouldn't be. I mean, then our protection is gone, so that when any other suggestion comes, be it the thoughts we spoke about earlier or anything else. So my thoughts were in relation to counteract this with returning to a sort of reading culture in that so-called dead time, because the order and the arrangement of the words on the page orders one's mind. It orders a child's mind. If it's a spiritual book, it communicates grace. If it's a nice fairy tale, it communicates morals. I mean, but that takes diligence on our part as parents to create that reading culture at home. Means whereby we can do this. Can we perhaps try to promote it as a church, discuss it in forums? What do you think about it generally as a concept? And
okay, I'm not an expert in any of this, so I can only answer in a practical way. I have quite a few young people now, and a lot of them come from non-Orthodox backgrounds. And I have an English service every Saturday, and that group of people is building and building. I'm very much aware that, generally speaking now, not about that group, and I'll come back to that in a moment, people are saying to me, Father, people don't read anymore. What they're doing is they're listening, but they're not reading. But where I come from, I need to hold a book. And the reason why I need to hold a book is that I need to be able to be in control of how much I read, of thinking about what I've read, reflecting on what I've read, going over what I've read, and taking my time so I can sip it, I'm sorry for the analogy, like a very fine port, so that I'm enjoying the moment. And if I enjoy the moment, then it enters my memory. But if I'm just a passive listener, and in the other examples you gave, it's almost a compliance without the active part of my mind being there. It's like a very passive compliance. And that's where the problem is, where the images are just rolling on and on and on. And that enters into subliminal areas. We're learning, but not consciously, subliminally. They come out then later because they're stored, those experiences. But for me, I hold a book. So at home, I've got a library of books. Getting back to the Orthodox people that are coming now, and children, of course, I've got a whole section of children's books. One of the big frustrations I've got is that they're very expensive to buy and therefore expensive to sell. And I feel constantly apologetic about it, but that's the best thing, to grab a book. It's in the front cover, it's got Yaya and she's making a Prospero. So they're very good things and themes that a child can sit and listen and can be read to, depending on the age, of course. But the young adult people that are coming now to the church from a non-Orthodox background of all walks of life, they're actually crowding the bookshop every Saturday morning. We haven't had sales like this before. Greek Orthodox people, and books of written in Greek, no, they're not even interested. They don't even go to the bookshop. You know why? Because Orthodoxy is their culture. So it's enough that it's their culture. No, you don't have to do anything. I'm Orthodox. That's it. Finished. Nothing else needs to be said. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent now. I've said enough.
Okay, πολύ ωραία. Anyone else? I had a request from one of our parents that they would love to have you again speak to us on any topic.
On any topic. Okay. Well, I like making sourdough bread. Would you like me to give a presentation?
Oh, Dimitri will be.
Sourdough bread.
Μην τον αρχίζεις το Δημήτρη.
Dimitri, θα σε αγκαλιάσω. Αν ήσουν εδώ, I would have embraced you.
We have to share starters. Have to post
Of
something.
course. Of course.
Okay, last question from Κωνσταντίνο. Έλα, Κωνσταντίνο.
Pater, ευλογείτε, Pater, πώς είστε καλά.
Κωνσταντίνο.
Thank you so much for the καλά, δόξα τω Θεώ, Pater. Thank you for your wealth of knowledge and spiritual uplifting here, listening to everything you said. I take it in my heart. And I just had a brainstorm, which probably just came out maybe through my heart. And I thought I'd just share this with you. Maybe if you can share this with us, knowing that my kids, they're 14 and 11. They attend school, and obviously now they're on Zoom. But a lot of the time after school commitments with their laptops, they tend to do a lot of social, well, besides their work and stuff, they do entertainment for themselves. And I feel that sometimes it does get a bit excessive, rather than having
What's
to
excessive,
have,
Costantino? What's excessive?
like entertainment, free time, games.
I'm talking about time. How much time are they spending on it?
Yeah, we're talking like probably more than 2 hours, maybe 3 hours.
No, that's why I asked you the question. That's going into a void for 2 hours. That's where you get lost for 2 hours. I would get very concerned, but at the same time, you heard what I said. You can't hammer people and you can't change them overnight. But you do have to start to establish some reasonable boundaries. 2 hours per day on amusement, I think is very lovingly and with a lot of understanding. You just have to manipulate this and reduce it quite considerably, so that there is a positive expression for time in some way that the child can then see itself and what it has done and to feel good about itself. Because I've seen a lot of children over time increase these empty hours, and then it starts to affect their mood and idea of themselves as being unproductive and useless. I know of one very chronic case where the child would remain on the computer until well into the early hours of the morning, you know, from 9 o'clock through till 2 o'clock. The father had would ring me out of concern. All sorts of problems emerged. Eventually, through that quiet persistence, lovingly, kindly, logically, and I'm talking about a period of about 4 to 5 years, that child has come out of it now. Thank God for that. But I have real grave concerns about this. And I'll tell you another reason, because some of the young people I'm confessing now confess to me about accessing pornography. And I asked them, what is the gateway for this? And I never quite get a clear answer, either because I don't understand or they're not putting it to me clearly. But social media has pop-ups, as I understand it. I don't go into any of it. I don't have a Facebook account. I will not have one. But my understanding is that there are gateways. So if a child is at this age learning all these things, they're also learning gateways. And then what's happening out there is going to affect them. And I mean, you know, for your dear, beautiful children, the last thing that you want is them to be exposed to vulgarity and ugliness and obscenity, which then they get confused with and they don't know what to do with.
I agree. I agree.
It's created a lot of issues, but that especially now with COVID and the lockdowns and like especially here in Sydney, our kids are so just so over this online learning, and they're just,
it's hard for you, very hard. And
Yeah.
that's coming for us as well, because although we've been safe for a long time, it's a bubble. Everyone uses the word now, it's a bubble. It's coming for us. Everyone's going to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
But it just shows you the
always said to
strength.
my kids that,
Oh, sorry.
sorry, Father.
Sorry.
I was just want to finish off what I was saying.
Yeah.
I've always said to my kids, learning on technology is an advantage compared to what we had
Yes.
back in
The
our
media.
day.
Yeah.
Turning up to class and taking notes and going home.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd always use the computers just to do our essays and print it out and submit it. That's what we used our computers for back in those days. These days, it's a bit more advanced now. But I find that kids these days are a bit more excessive in using, not just for, as you said, their work, but it's also for entertainment and, as you said, gateways. And that's what concerns me the most. But I have said to my kids once, sorry, no.
I just want to say a point here, because as we speak a lot about vaccinations these days, part of the atmosphere I think that we have a responsibility for in our Orthodox homes is to be able to address this issue in a way in which inoculates our kids, because they're going to be confronted by many things. So I think some openness with your children as they grow older, if you can find the confidence. As I said, in my background, nobody taught me anything, even from my mother, my father, but I knew they loved me. But we're facing a very, very serious world now in terms of what darkness is out there and what is endeavoring to invade our home. I think the degree of openness to create this resilience as your children get older, Costantino.
I agree, Father. And it's like them committing themselves to working, but they're not working in that sense when it comes to entertainment. And I've said to my kids once, I said, the way you commit yourselves to your laptops is like, you might as well do stock exchange or e-commerce. Like, you might as well just do online business. But and then they said, oh, sorry, Dad, I understand what you're saying, but we're just there's so much things out there which we'd like to learn and understand when we go out in the world. But first,
but that has to be balanced, Costantino, with what I said earlier.
Yes,
and I speak as a person. Everyone's a person, of course, so I'm not really saying anything here, but I want to do things. I don't want to conceptually understand things only. So if I'm into a virtual world with thoughts and ideas, and I'm not doing anything, that is actually undermining my person.
stuff.
Yeah, I think
That's all.
we'll, thank you. I think
Okay.
we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very
Finish with a
much.
prayer.
Thank you very much, Father, for a wonderful talk, and we'll finish off with prayer. Thank you very much.
Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Thank you for being there. I'd love to meet you one day.